People would just drop off the whole.
Yeah. Look, in the old days, schools had a
I
bunch
think that
of
last one I did was
it's just
60.
everyone-
We have lots of shoes.
Right, but you can't I don't know. Now everything it costs money.
Yeah.
To make
I buried something in the ground.
How cool.
But I think
It's a different world.
I think it was different 30 years ago.
It comes with
There was like a couple of years.
whenever there's
Time I purchased something just then. I would have.
Can someone click the link and see if I'm on the right? So there's two people there, so a little bit.
You want to spray?
I can't talk to people, like ask them, like sound check. So there are two people that say they're there. So.
Oh, you're not on YouTube.
It's this new thing they want me on YouTube. Okay. Hey, Ari. So nice to see you. Okay.
Question is, where is that link?
Okay. Okay, guys. So nice. It's so nice to have everyone here, especially some new faces. Great to be able to learn together. It's unfortunately an old topic. It just become a little bit more relevant again today in our lives. That we are wrestling with the question of conflict, with suffering. There's a lot of suffering in the world today. I'm getting reports from my wife. I don't know what she wants to share live. I can't even catch up with all of her posts, but she said today. It's working. Okay. But she just told me today that in the state of Israel that there is a general feeling of that there's a moment now where the average low dati person is really grappling with God. And she was saying it actually more from there's a moment here where people are actually drawn towards God, whether it's the soldiers who are seeking God in the sense of please protect me, feeling their vulnerability, whether it's just the fear of what we face as a nation, as a people, and there's no one else to turn to but a God. And I'm sure there are a slew of other questions, and I'll just put it out because it's one of the questions that I want to try to talk about, and not to avoid it, is the question of, well, where was God? Right. And so that's a question of where was God, which is not a new question. And so some of the learning that we're going to do over the course of however long this grabs people's interest is trying to just go through some classical discussions, approaches that were asked really post-Shoah. These are not the first time in Jewish history where people were grappling with questions about God. Where does God go when there are difficult things going on in the world? But I'll say personally, I hadn't read Kol Dodi Fake in a long time, and that was the main thing I was drawn to over the last couple of weeks, was rereading some of my notes in Kol Dodi Fake, and I don't know how much the average person has read Kol Dodi Fake. So I thought, depending on how much interest there is, we could either study it more, just read through it more carefully, or just I could kind of draw out some of the main themes. So we'll see how this goes, and I want your feedback. So ultimately, it should be a conversation, and I'm sure you are aware of other sources and approaches that I won't be aware of. So it should be a learning together, not just a monologue. Okay, so just to contextualize from our parsha, though, it's nice to just see where these issues come from our parsha. So there were two places in the parsha where I thought one might be able to see bits and pieces of things I think that we're all thinking about, or maybe we should be thinking about in terms of the struggle that we're facing the existential threat we're facing, let's say, as a people. So one of them is in the birth of Binyamin. Just a very brief context of the parsha. So the 11 sons were born with Lavan last week, but Binyamin has not yet been born. Yaakov is going to face Esav, his nemesis / the kid who he shared a bunk bed with growing up. So he's going to face him getting our parsha, and then the Shechem Dina episode's going to happen in Vayishlach, and then after that, basically Rachel gives birth to Binyamin and dies during childbirth. So just if you read through the psukim that describe Binyamin's birth in Parak Lamed Hey Pasuk Yadayin, Vayi v'hakshotah b'liyatah v'atomer lahami aleret al tiri ki gam zeh laben. The nursemaid Rachel is having trouble during delivery, and the wet nurse says, "Don't worry, you're also having a son." Obviously, alluding to the fact that she's at least going to have 2 children. She wouldn't be less than the Bill and Zilpah, the nursemaids. And then the pasuk says, "Vahi b'tzeit nafsha," and literally, it's as her soul was departing her, kimeta, because she was dying. Vatikra shmo ben Oni, and Rachel calls her son Ben Oni, which I think I should have put some translations here, but I probably the common translation, I could be wrong, is the son of my affliction. I think that's commonly translated that way, son of my affliction. The Aviv karalo bin Yamin, but that's not what Yaakov calls him. Yaakov immediately says, no, his name is bin Yamin, not Ben Oni. Bin Yamin, the son of my right hand, or son of my strength of some sort. Rachel, and then Rachel passes away. Right? Rashi says Ben Oni, more the classic approach. Ben Sarit, that was the translation that I gave. That's Alpi Rashi. Whereas Rav Hirsch is the approach that I want to come back to. Okay, so we have this episode where we have a strange case where mom says Ben Oni and dad says Benjamin. What do we make of this? Of these 2 names that are given at this juncture? Remember, Yaakov just lost his cherished wife, so he's also going through a personal trauma at that moment. Besides, he's lost his wife, and she's saying, "This is the son of my affliction." We know she's been waiting for another son. There is a relief, as clearly stated in the previous pasuk, that there's a relief that she has this son. At the same time, she's saying Benoni, and Yaakov's like, "No, Benjamin." So what's going on here? Anyone given thought to this question? If anyone has any ideas in these psukim, I'll share. Maybe once we've delved a little more into the Rav, I'll share how I think. Rav Hirsch, I think, really is saying the same ideas Rav Soloveitchik says. But I want to hear anyone else have any thoughts on this.
I mean, this is the only son that Yaakov himself names, which I always found odd. Every other child was named by the wife, by the mother, which adds to me the curiosity of.
Here he stepped in. He deviates. He doesn't like her call.
Right.
Very interesting. I never thought about that. Great insight. Yeah. Anyone else?
Not always the mother. The Bill Manzil, the original wife names them.
There's a proxy.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. But Yaakov did. But I think it's interesting. Yaakov doesn't veto. That's interesting. Yaakov vetoes here. That fits in with what Rav Hirsch says. I want to share. Yeah. There's a hand there. Okay. So, but yeah, David.
So, just looking at the 2 names, Ben Oni, if it's like son of my tribulations, or as good as any, I guess, and Benjamini as the son of my right hand, is looking at sort of 2 sides of the same coin. One is looking at it as the source of the trouble, and the other as the remedy.
Okay, beautiful. It just reminded me that when Rashi, or I think it may have been the pasuk even, when it describes what Yosef was named Yosef, it said something like Asaph, because like I want to have another. Like Yosef is named based on number 2. He's definitely has to have a therapist, right? He's not even given a second to appreciate his being alive in the world. His name is Yosef. I need another. So you're saying this, at least this kid gets to feel like he's the remedy, as opposed to he didn't even get a second. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, Zani?
Leah and Rachel, to me, particularly Rachel's pinnacle being Mavater. Like saying, you know what, I'm sacrificing of myself, I'm giving over to the other, even though there's a conflict. So that's one approach that, okay, let's just kind of like not give in, but kind of like give the other person kind of their space to receive and so forth. Whereas the other position is Benjamin, which has been called, which is stronger, which is like, it's nice to kind of give over, but it's also very important to kind of stay your ground and be, kind of like self-advocate and do your own thing and represent yourself. But I echo that it could be 2 sides of the same coin, that different circumstances could call for the different approaches.
Such a nice idea. Love it. Yeah, Ari.
I think it's very weird that she calls him being Oni as she's dying, because, there's probably a lot of things going through her mind at that moment, but, thinking of how this kid is going to grow up with the name of Ben Oni, this like permanent marker of like, not just like your mother died, but your mother is still dead, and like it's a constant reminder.
Mm.
And I actually think it's a little selfish in that way, and kind of what you were saying with the Yosef thing, like the names that she's giving is about her, which is unusual and not the character we usually think of as Rachel. And so I just think it's very strange, and I think Yaakov probably is like, okay, no, we're not going there. Like I'm gonna have to bear this scar for long enough. Like I don't need the name to be a reminder here.
I love that. I love that. Almost like Yaakov is psychologically trying to protect his son. Like
And
I don't
himself.
and himself. Love that. Love that idea. Right? Yaakov saying that's not going to work. Right? And that would
A lot of
explain Adam's heart. Yeah.
A lot of the Leah names have a strange marker. Reuven, Shimon, like
Sinua, Shema.
right. I was hated. Hashem, so that I
Finally, I'm an equal.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there any room to interpret Ben Oni as the Ben that has come after all of my suffering? That's sort of
Like you're redeeming.
yeah, like sort of redeeming all my suffering.
So maybe we should see the reverse, because he talks about death in his thing, but maybe we should see reverse now as opposed to, I thought I was going to do a cliffhanger and come back to reverse then, but maybe just we don't forget it. We can look at reverse. But yeah, David, you want to say something else? Or?
I think Ari was right there, but like, she's on her way out, and she's giving him this name of affliction, but Yaakov's really going to be using this son, so to speak, as what's going to keep him going in the future, going forward. He's still going to be around,
Right?
So he's he's kind of overruling for himself.
Right. Okay, so let's see reverse. But again, keep in mind this reverse. I think will tie to a lot of what I think Rav Soloveitchik talks about in Kol Dodido Fake. So reverse says, and this is just it's a longer piece. I tried to just take the core of it. It says Hamashmaut in sorcery. Hamashmaut habasisit shall own the essential basis of the definition of the word own. Hi hagufanit or amusarit lekabel bailut al davar. Means the ability, but whether it's a physical or a spiritual ability, to take ownership over a matter. Again, I never heard this before, but own has this connotation of bailus, like to seize control. V'kach gam kan ben oni, and when Rachel calls it the son of my affliction, he's saying ben ha'ninut sheli. He's saying the son of my death. Ben ha'mavet sheli shebekarav yit'avlu alav. That in a little bit there's going to be an avelut. So I'm not sure if this is any better, but Rachel seems to be saying like almost like this is going to mark my own death. It almost sounds like kind of how Ari described it, right? It's about, I want this to be like a remembrance of my death. And by the way, I think somewhere in here we talks about aninut. That what is the stage of aninut? Aninut is where you're wrestling over the loss. It's the first stage of avelut. Before you become an avel, you go through a halachic period of where meitu mutalafana, before kfura, from death to kfura, you're an onein. So there's this element of kind of still having to take ownership and come bailus over the loss. There's almost like that initial shock. I just realized that my father sponsored this. I wanted to say that we're learning Torah Ilunish is my bubby whose yortzeit is today. Or was today. So let me just get the name out. Okay, yes, the learning is sponsored by my parents in honor of the yortzeit of my bubby Gittel Bashmuel Moshe HaKohen. My bubby, just say a very quick thing. I should say something. My bubby actually fits very thematically into this because my bubby was a survivor of Auschwitz. She very much, the very short story is that she was in Poland. She went back into Germany once the war started and hid herself as a Polish girl because she knew that in Poland they would know she's a Jew. The Germans couldn't, they were prejudiced against Jews and Poles. So she felt it'd be easier to to own her false identity as a non-Jewish Pole in Germany. So she had the chutzpah, go back into Germany and have mamash what koach, and she was a real she was a ben koach. She was not a ben oni. She was a ben koach, which I hope all of us can lean into that as well. And she wrote a book called "My Bones Don't Rest in Auschwitz," again, which also speaks a little bit to her essence. So her neshama should have an aliyah. Okay, so that Rav Hirsch is saying that Rachel maybe was marking the loss, but look at Rav Hirsch says Aviv Karlo Ben Yamin. He points out that but Yaakov calls her Ben Yamin, Ben Koach, like Zani said. V'chein hafach et Hashem l'tova. He was able to transform the name into a positive thing. Kind of taking on a new connotation of avon. Not this idea of owning the loss, but maybe of Ben Yamin, Ben Koach, of finding strength through the process. Okay? So how do we do that? How do we go from owning, having bias over loss, kind of it's almost like acceptance, if we had to go through the steps of grieving, right? The acceptance of grief, to then how do you go to Ben Koach and growing from such a process? Yeah, Ari.
I was just looking up the Brown Driver Briggs translation of own, and like the main definition is indeed this like trouble or sorrow, but the second definition is very interesting. It's vigor and wealth, and he like quotes like Hoshea and you know, and a few other Nevi'im where like there's like this merov onim, you know, from because of abundance of great strength. So it's actually this. It's possible that she meant it in the second definition.
Right. Sounds very similar to what Rav Hirsch is saying a little bit. That there's some. Well, everyone's saying there's something that Yaakov was trying to imbue him with strength.
But what I'm saying is that like maybe she was saying Yosef, I want another, and Bain Oni. If it's this like wealth definition, then I finally got what I wanted.
Even Rachel was saying
Yes.
that. Okay, got it. Okay, interesting. Okay, so either way, we're trying to talk about how does one, whether it was Rachel did understand, maybe Yaakov misunderstood her, right? That's what Ari is now suggesting. Then, but how do we go to Ben own to Ben Koach in either direction? Okay, so there's another story of fear and anxiety, and that's early in the parsha. Again, just a parsha connection that Yaakov is running away from Esav. The pasuk says, "Vayir Yaakov mo vayitzel." Yaakov is afraid and he is pained. The pasuk says, "Vayivater Yaakov levado," and then he brings his whole family over the river. Just give you a quick synopsis, and then he goes back to get some pachim gedanim or whatever he was going back for. Next thing you know, he finds himself Vayivater Yaakov levado, vayavik ishimo. The famous wrestling match takes place in our parsha. But the Rashbam, which is not the more conventional approach, the classic thing that we learned in second grade is that Yaakov goes back to the little jugs of whatever, and Tzaddik cares about his little jugs of whatever. But the Rashbam says something, more probably pshat oriented. The Rashbam says, why was Yaakov, he was going over the river with his family, why was he crossing the river? So the Rashbam says, source 5, Ratzah lavor achareim, he wanted to come after them, ki livroach derech acheret, Yaakov was trying to run away. He was not trying to have a confrontation with Esav. After the whole way the parsha begins, which is kind of preparing for a confrontation, and then Yaakov gets scared, and his anxiety kicks in, and he tries to run away. And then Rashbam says, "V'ya avek malachimo," the malach wrestles with him, "Shelo yuchal livrach," that you're not able to run. Hashem is basically saying you got to stay in the ring. You can't tap out right now. The yira kiyum. And Yaakov has to sit and see how Akash Baruch promises that he's not going to be killed by Esav. You're going to be okay. So I just want to point out, I think here too, there's like Rashbam is saying that Yaakov was human. Yaakov actually may have tried to run away from the big quarrel, and Akash Baruch forces him to have to confront whatever the big bad wolf that he's afraid of. In this case, it's Esav. So I thought that was also perhaps can tie into this whole what we feel today, that there's maybe a little bit of anxiety, maybe a lot of anxiety, maybe there's some, we don't know what's going to happen exactly in America and Israel. There's a lot of unknown, but maybe we have to figure out. So how do we respond? What are we supposed to do given the circumstance that we face? Okay, David. Yes.
Yeah, so I was just going to say, it sounds like this episode is also almost like a personification of the names Ben Oni and Ben Yoni.
Yeah. You're saying the Yaakov running away episode?
Yeah,
Yeah, say more. What do you mean?
in the sense that he's running away. So in that case, he's a Ben Oni. But when he's forced to confront the Malach, then he has to become a Ben Yamin.
Beautiful. And it's interesting because this happens in the beginning of the parsha. The Binyamin naming is later. Maybe Yaakov learned something from the confrontation, right? What does the Malach say to Yaakov ultimately when he says, "Give me a bracha"? He says, "I give you your name changed from Yaakov to Yisrael." He becomes right, he's elevated from that experience. So maybe beautiful. Maybe Yaakov has channeled his Ben Yamin a little bit, and that's why he's able to see that strength. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, fine. So all this is just to have a parsha, start thinking about the parsha, and get our parsha fluids rolling. But I think when it comes to this whole last couple of weeks, is I think it's source Adam sent me actually, but probably the primary source where people should at least be aware of, and I thought it was important for everyone to see it, is the Rambam. The Rambam talks about, when we talk about how does a Jew respond to a challenging situation, so the Rambam talks about it. The Rambam gives us a very explicit guideline. So let's read through the Rambam and try to infer. So the Rambam says, mitzvahs ase achas. There is a mitzvahs ase. V'hi lit'anot lizok lifnei Hashem v'chol eis tzara gedola shetava al tzibor. A Jew is commanded when there's a tzara that faces the community, you're supposed to fast and to daven. Fast and scream. Okay? And then he goes on to flesh out the halachos that are relevant. Mitzvahs ase min Torah lizok v'la'ariya b'chatzotzros hakol tzara shetava al tzibor. Is mitzvah ase to scream out and to blast the chatzotzrot on any calamity that confronts the Jewish people. Whatever pains you, anything which is like a mass challenge to the Jewish people, plague, pestilence, all these different famines, all these different things. So you should daven. So the mitzvah ase midaraisa to daven. The davar is every darki at tshuva. This is from the approach to a part of the process of doing tshuva. So the Rambam says, because it's also trying to get you to do some sort of cheshbon nefesh, to say, well, maybe because of our actions, we're not being good enough, so that's why Hashem is bringing this upon ourselves. And that's what's hopefully going to remove the tzara from them doing the tshuva. But if you don't cry out and you don't do these truot, if you just say this is all natural, God is not involved in any of this. But and this just happened. Again, they're harsh words, the Rambam. And I'm saying if you believe that tzara happens, that God wasn't somehow involved on some level, that's a cruel way of living life. Because you're just going to stay stuck in whatever your midos, whatever challenges you're facing. It's going to actually perpetuate more tzarot. You're kind of living. Bekeri kind of means like everything is mikra, everything is chance. There's no master design in the world. Everything is just happening by happenstance. Okay. And he says midivrei sofrim halacha daled rabbinically litanot kol tzar shetava al tzibur ad sheyeruchmu min Hashem. We want to do tshuva and for any calamity until we have mercy from the heavens. Okay. So I think we have two paradigms here, two paradigms in the Rambam, and they're harsh. They seem harsh. It's like in modern days, it's hard to grapple with what Rambam saying. Rambam saying one approach is that when a calamity happens, you say, well, we have to do klap al chet. Say, we've done as a society something wrong, as Jewish people something wrong. That's hard. That's hard to digest because we don't believe that people obviously did anything, personally wrong to deserve such evil. On the other hand, as from Jews, we don't want to imply that God is absent and missing, and almost that's like another. It's almost worse to say, well, God is not in the world, or the world is leaderless, rudderless, whatever the terminology would be. So that's also a something that's hard to swallow. So I want to hopefully show how I think maybe the Rav's piece can maybe fit into what the Rambam's saying over here. But this is what the Rambam said. Yes, Baruch.
Just a side point,
Thanks.
interesting observation that
pasuk says chatzotros, doesn't say daven, right? And then the pasuk Rambam quotes.
Yeah.
And then we say, and then obviously we interpret that to be cry out and blow trumpets.
Right.
But what happened? Like, why don't it's a mitzvah the rest of the trumpets?
Yeah. So Adam asked me if we can bring out the shofars and start. That's why we started talking
So,
about
but
this.
what
No,
happened?
but
Where
it
did
doesn't even count. Shofar isn't a chatzot.
No,
Right?
right,
It's
right.
like a silver thing, you know. Everything.
Yeah.
they're different, right? Doesn't more in time the Mishnah in time talk about chatzotros and shofars
There's a
also,
whole
too?
for Tanios. There's a whole thing. Yeah, the whole procession.
So
how
what,
they did.
what
it.
happened to trumpets? Where'd it go?
So I think there's a footnote in Kol Video Fake that talks about this, and he tries to bring diukim that they're obviously different when we have a base of Mikdash when we don't have a base of Mikdash. The chatzot I think are only if we have a base of Mikdash, but he has a whole shtickle over trying to explain that if you look at the Koteret, it's a very good observation you're saying, but he does point out that in the way the Rambam gives like his title for what he's about to talk about, he did not mention chatzot. Only when he fleshed out details he mentioned chatzot, and therefore in the Rav's piece, I noticed a footnote. I didn't look like the direction I was going to go this year, but he tries to say that clearly there's something even in Bisman Hazeh when there's not in times of Beit Mikdash.
He also classifies like the all of the natural disasters he's referring to. There's a clarification that it's like only in Israel that everyone fasts. If it's local, then only your town fasts.
Right before Rav Shechter, literally like a day before Rav Shechter, like said we should all be fasting. Adam sent me this Rambam. So why aren't we fasting? And like a day later, I guess, did you send it to Rav Shechter?
No.
Okay. So the next day,
I'm in my kind of relationship.
the next day, Rav Shechter, like, we should all be fasting. I was like, okay. Okay. So this Rambam. The Rambam really is it's eerie, and it's also it's hard. It's hard, and also with modern questions, I want to also provide other approaches for us. Okay. So just once we mentioned the Rambam of mitzvahs aseh of tefillah, I just want to just allude to the fact there's a famous machloket between the Rambam and the Ramban about whether or not there's a mitzvah d'oraisa to daven. So this kind of segues into that a little bit. That the Rambam felt that it's mitzvah d'oraisa to daven in general once a day, not necessarily the minyan of tefillah. That is all from the rabbis, but the idea of davening once a day, according to the Rambam, is learned from anytime the Torah talks about the idea of avodah, and the Ramban famously said, no, that it's not mitzvah d'oraisa to daven daily. It's only midoraisa. It's only from the Torah when there's an ace tzara. That's in source 9. That's Sagas of Ramban. Ramban said there's a crisis, then you have to daven. That all the psukim about avodah, who tefillah shabalev, avodah shabalev, that was referring to in a crisis.
Specifically with a minyan, or just in general?
No, I think even the Ramban would say that presumably that Eis Tzara is what is the machayev for tefillah. So minyan is already like rabbinic. The whole idea of minyan and which tefillah to say that's all rabbinic. But I bring this here not just because we saw the Rambam about Tanya, but I also think for those who struggle with tefillah, I just want to put it out there. I think if you struggle with tefillah, now is a time to tap into it. Even if you don't find it as meaningful, or it's hard to connect, or you don't understand the words, or it's hard spiritually to know who am I talking to, because a lot of us struggle with davening. It's a hard, very hard mitzvah. I think just knowing that we're in a crisis, and there's this thing called tefillah that is, I think it's a time to remind people that is an option that we have at our disposal, and it's actually referred to in the Ramban. I thought so beautiful. In the fourth line of the Ramban, he says in the source 9, he says, "Elavadai kol inyan tefillah ino chova klal." According to the Ramban, I'm not trying to get you out of davening. You still become davening, but according to the Ramban, tefillah is not an obligation. Again, he felt it was all rabbinic. It's like the mercy of God that God promised us that He'll listen to us when we call to Him. Which I thought was just so beautiful. And the Ramban is saying, like, it's a beautiful thing that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us this mitzvah, whether according to the Ramban it's the Rabbanan, that Kadosh Baruch Hu was like, if you call to me, if you call to me, I'm going to listen. I think that's just a beautiful idea. And the formulation, it's a midas hachesed, is also okay. All of this is just to say we do have, before Kol Lido Fake, before more modern philosophers and rabbinic philosophers attempted to answer the big questions like why is there suffering in the world, we have approaches, we have kindness, we have tefillah, yeah. But this is all segue though. I want to kind of now segue into looking at some more contemporary thinkers on the questions of suffering. So I want to just give you a roadmap of what we have in front of you. There's a lot of handouts here. Okay, what I provided for you is essentially some is from Holy Dofek in Hebrew. My understanding is the Rav gave this lecture 10 years after the formulation of the State of Israel, so in about 1958, somewhere in that range. I thought I read somewhere he gave it in Yiddish, but it was written up in Hebrew. I could be wrong on that. It may have been said originally in Hebrew. I just learned the original Hebrew, and then I realized that I had on my bookshelf at some point, I probably took it from my dad. He had an English version. And so I also printed out the English version. I wasn't sure if the crowd tonight would prefer the English. Rav Soloveitchik's English is hard to understand, let alone his Hebrew. So you see, you have my copy. I have a lot of words translated, as his words are very, highbrow Hebrew. So I think we can go through some of the English. And then after the Rav's piece, I also have a really interesting article from Rav Lichtenstein about how do we respond to suffering and the Holocaust, and some other really cool stuff. So we're not going to get through all this tonight, but I just want to give you a little bit of a roadmap of. So who here has learned Kol Dofek? Has anyone read it? Part of it. Yeah. It's like one of those things that like we all should know it, but like it sits in our bookshelf and picks up cobwebs. And last 2 weeks I was like, I think this is really relevant now. I feel like this is back should be back on our, the books on our table as opposed to our shelf, right? So I think we should, my guess, we should read a little bit of English. And then we'll see how it goes. If you guys feel like it's too boring to read an English thing together, we'll deviate, okay? So let's start on page 5. Again, the Rav is 10 years after the creation of the State of Israel, so he's grappling with an early fledgling nation that has just emerged from the Shoah with a lot of questions, okay? So he says in the top of page 5, his page 2, it says, why does the Holy One, blessed be He, permit evil to have dominion over His creations? So Judaism, in quest for a safe harbor in a world split and dismembered by existential suffering, and its search for a solution to the mystery of the suffering that to all outward appearances pervades without limits, came to a new formulation and definition of this problem that has both greater breadth and greater depth. Posing the question of suffering, claims Judaism, is possible in 2 separate dimensions: the dimension of fate and the dimension of destiny. I just want to tell you, if you have not heard this before, this is like the most classic Rav Soloveitchik idea. If there's one person who's never heard this, it's worth it that you know it's the Rav Soloveitchik's formulation of understanding that there's Jews of fate and Jews of destiny. Judaism has always distinguished between the existence of fate and existence of destiny, between the I, which is the progeny of a fate, and the I, which is the child of destiny. In this distinction lies hidden the Jewish doctrine of suffering. What is an existence of fate? How do we define these terms? It's an existence of duress in the nature of, against your will, do you live, as the Mishnah says. It's a factual existence, simply one line in a long chain of mechanical causality, devoid of significance, direction, and purpose, and subordinate to the force of the environment to whose midst the individual is pushed, and unconsulted by providence. The eye of fate emerges as an object. As an object, man appears acted upon and not as actor. He is acted upon through his passive collision with the objective outside, as one object confronting another. The eye of fate is hurled into a sealed dynamic that is always turned outward. Man's existence is hollow, lacking inner content, substance, and independence. The eye of fate denies itself completely because the sense of selfhood and objectification cannot dwell in tandem. Okay? We're going to see in the next paragraph, I just want to pause for 1 second, that if we think about what happened on October 7th, we think of probably the main motif that comes is that our people were treated like objects, right? They were treated as people of fate, right? They were the ones who were close. They were the ones who were visiting their grandma or their bubby or at the wrong time, and they were butchered. And we have no explanation for that. But this imagery of you know, what he says is goral and yud, or the Hebrew terms that he uses, fate and destiny, is that the people there were, we couldn't even fight back. You know, there were some soldiers, but it wasn't enough. And it feels like these themes of fate were very much, unfortunately, you know, what our brothers and sisters faced. And here he basically goes on to say, and this I thought really captured why I felt like we're now a month away, or 54 or 5 days away. Where I feel like it's still fresh, but we're able to, maybe some of us have started, we're past just the stage of, okay, we've davened, we've said to him. Even tonight, I felt like even saying to him, like 55 days later, it doesn't feel the same every day, especially during a ceasefire right now for a few days. It's hard to always live in that initial stage of fight or flight, and then you start to, like, when there's a little bit of quiet, you start thinking and pondering intellectual questions. That's how the Rav actually kind of contextualizes the process. He says, it's against such a background the experience of evil surfaces in all its terror. There are two stages in fate existence. From the start, the man object, imprisoned against his will, bound up in the chains of existence, stands perplexed and confused in the face of the great mystery called suffering. Fate mocks him. His existence, crazed and torn, opposes itself and denies its worth and importance. The fear of extinction assails him and crushes his body and soul. The sufferer wanders lost in the vacuousness of the world with God's fear spread over him and his anger tensed against it. He's entirely shaken and agitated. His agonies are devoid of any clear meaning, and they appear as satanic forces, as outgrowths of the primal chaos that pollutes the creation, whose destiny it was to be a reflection of the Creator. At this stage of perplexity and speechlessness, of numbness of the heart and confusion of the mind, man does not ask at all about the reason for evil in its essence. He simply suffers in silence, is choked by his anguish, which silences his complaint and suppresses questioning inquiry. To me, this, like, captures, you know, the last month, where and maybe if we want to just be less raw, we could frame this as the 20 or so years until the Eichmann trial, where, like, for 30 years no one post Shoah was talking about what happened in the Shoah. Like, survivors were just silent. That's what I take out of what the Rav's saying. There was a certain silence where you're just, like, paralyzed by what just happened. It was so big, so heavy, so inexplicable, and then you're not asking intellectual, theoretical, philosophical questions. That's all stage one. But then the Rav goes on and says, after the psychic quaking of the sufferer, which comes as the first reaction to suffering, comes the intellectual curiosity of the sufferer, which seeks to understand existence and to strengthen the sufferer's safety and security. At this stage, man begins to examine suffering, to ask weighty questions. He searches for the rational foundations of suffering and evil, and endeavors to find the tranquility and harmony that lie between the positive and negative, and thus remove the edge, the tension between the thesis good and the antithesis evil of existence. Okay, I don't want to read everything, but any thoughts, any reflections that are people emerging, especially for those who have not heard this, maybe. Because I don't think we need to read the whole thing.
I guess, is he implying that in the first stage of the fate stage that there is no questioning, it's just acceptance?
I understood it, but I could be wrong.
Yeah. I
More
guess
that there's, like, it's like shock and, like, a numbness of, like, or like the world makes no sense, and I'm paralyzed by my grief or the loss or the confusion. Almost like the rational brain isn't working at that. That's how I interpret it. But anyone else interpret differently or want to respond to Ari differently?
These are two different perceptions. He's saying, like, you could take one route or the other.
Right. He's basically going to go on to say that a Jew has to try to take the shift. Again, the Rav's big idea, if it would help us to know the big idea, is to take the shift from being people of faith to people of destiny.
It's not a phase. It's how you perceive it.
It's how you perceive the world and the world's unfolding. Do you view us as just acted upon, or are we actors in
Part of
some
that, yeah.
meta stage, cosmic stage? That's the Rav's idea.
When I think about the situation, that occurred, like, this was decades leading up to this, and there are people that say, "Oh, could have done this, could have done that, stop this from happening many years ago," and that's part of the process. It's just one element of it, but like we are very much part of the whole thing that happened. It wasn't just like fate. Like we're part of everything. The decision that Hashem made to have this happen.
Right. You're saying like the tapestry of the story has been
Like I'm not even pointing at one thing. I'm saying like the decisions that we had to lead to that point, and it could have been that we weren't doing our part as Jews. It could have been that the government of Israel made certain decisions, but that we are very much a part of the equation, and it's not just that this would have happened no matter what. That's all.
right. Yeah.
But I don't know what he's going to say about destiny if it's how we.
Again, the Rav is trying to give us a template for how a righteous person suffers, right? And by the way, I think it's very important to say this, that this is whether we're talking about someone in their own personal loss or a cosmic. We're right now we're reading this because of this major situation that we're in as a as a Jewish people, as the state of Israel is kind of in a precarious situation. But if I've just gone through a personal loss, this is also relevant to me. It's not just about, on a klal level. It's also on a personal. How do we relate to, to loss and that which is hard to understand, suffering. Yeah. There's a lot of suffering.
As I'm thinking through this, I think the way that I understand this idea of fate is like, I think back to that Simchas Torah when we were all like nagging, all the CSS people that were getting the updates, and we were like just trying to take in and just be like, what on earth just happened? And we were just in this like very weird situation of, do we dance? Do we not dance? Like it was, I guess this shock, and maybe not the silence, but I guess maybe I think that's this like before you can even question it, you're understanding it first and flabbergasted, as to like, did this actually happen? Is this even possible? Like, what, they have hostages? Like, how's that possible? Right. Before the, like, how could this have happened?
Right. And I'm just going back to the aninut avelut thing. I think there's also that one by personal loss also, right? Aninut is your pater from mitzvot because you're not in a rational mind. You're just in like, you're a little bit of a state of shock, and then you're not really doing, you're not telling really narrative of the person usually during that stage. Aninut is really you're by yourself and you're in your paralyzed state, and then avelus is really where you're kind of intellectually you're trying to shift the. Yeah.
Again, like the stages of grief at one of them all. Like, denial is definitely, I think, one of the first one, and then acceptance comes after that. And tell me
Right.
what you're saying, and what Ari's saying, it's like
first
stage denial happened. Availus also, and then it's like the acceptance of at first it's like what happened, and then okay, why, and like actually talk about it, and Availus also like understanding it more.
Yep. So let's read a little bit more of that. There's something I want to get back to ultimately is I am a believer in spirituality. I'm a believer in feeling God, channeling God in our avoda. And so it's hard for me when I think about this as like rational side of me to ask these questions and thinks about these questions, where I also like I can feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So like, how can I feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Like there's abject evil in the world. And that's something that I wrestle with, and I want to ultimately take this whole conversation and be able to address that, those two poles. So the Rav says here that the way a Jew's supposed to live our lives is as realists. He says, where the arrow, skip there, he says, Judaism, with its realistic approach to man, is status in existence, understood that evil does not lend itself to being obscured and glossed over, that every attempt to diminish the import of the conscious and cleavage in existence will not bring man to inner peace or a comprehension of the existential secret. Evil is a fact that cannot be denied. There is evil in the world. There are suffering and agony and pain, death pains. He who would deceive himself by ignoring the split in existence by romanticizing life is but a fool and a fabricator of illusions. It's impossible to conquer monstrous evil with philosophical, speculative thought. Thus Judaism determined that man, submerged in the depths of a frozen fate, will in vain seek the solution of the problem of evil in the kind of speculative thought, he'll never find it. So certainly the testimony of the Torah regarding creation is very good, is true, however, that's only stated from the unbounded perspective of the Creator. In man's finite, limited view, the absolute good in creation is not apparent. Again, so the Rav's kind of saying here, there's always going to be bad, there's going to be suffering, and we have to figure out how do we have a religious worldview that acknowledges that there's evil and bad in the world. And then the Rav goes on to give that tapestry mashal, which is pretty famous, where you recognize that we might only be seeing a limited picture. So he gives the mashal of like it's like the tapestry that we're looking at the bottom, and the threads look all helter skelter and out of whack. But if you would flip it over, you can see the whole picture. It would look like a tapestry, and that he says he gives that mashal. I don't know if it's his original mashal, but he does give that mashal in the next part. But I want to move on to get to some of the destiny parts. Right now, we're talking about there's this idea of fate. Let's move to the bottom, page 6. There he says, in the second dimension of man's existence, destiny, the question of suffering takes on a new form. What's an existence of destiny? Right? Fate was you're acted upon. What is destiny? It's an active existence. When man confronts the environment to which he has been cast with an understanding of his uniqueness and value, freedom and capacity, without compromising his integrity, independence, and his struggle with the outside world. The slogan of the Eye of Destiny, this is actually really cool Torah. It says the slogan of the Eye of Destiny is, against your will you're born, and against your will you will die. That's the mission of Avot. But by your free will do you live. Man is born as an object, dies as an object, but is within his capability to live as a subject, as a creator and innovator who impresses individual imprimatur on his life and breaks out of a life of instinctive automatic behavior to one of creative activity. According to Judaism, man's mission in this world is to turn fate into destiny. So here the Rav kind of starts to now say his thesis. An existence that's passive and influence into an existence that's active and influential. Existence of compulsion, perplexing, speechlessness, an existence of full of will, vision, initiative. The blessing of the Holy One. Okay. So I think that from this paragraph already we can start to unpack this idea that part of the process that we've been responding, is recognizing that we're not just acted upon, that we have to assert ourselves. And I think we have been, right? Asserting ourselves means we have Tzahal, right? We have this great army who's not going to just, be sheep led to slaughter. We're going to fight back. That's part of destiny. And I think also for all of us, whether it's going to rallies or writing to our, politicians, those are all gestures of making transition from people of fate into people of destiny. And so can davening and so can learning also, right? These are all ways of trying to make that leap of we're not going to be acted upon. We want to be actors in our life. So maybe I'll just pause here. Any thoughts on this idea?
Seems like a much healthier, spirituality aside, it's just a much healthier way to get past suffering is to not be passive. You fall into depression, but active. It's much healthier. Yeah.
See, there's this great line in the next thing. It says, "Evil mocks the prisoner of fate. His fantasy of a reality that is all good and pleasant." And I feel like the world is kind of mocking us right now. It feels that way. They're laughing at us, and I think one could succumb to the depression or the hopelessness in the world if you aren't a believer, right? If you're not a person of faith, then right now things are really not looking good for Jews. I mean, I'm not, without God in the world, without something to spirituality to turn to, I think my guess is that's why a lot of people are turning more to spirituality now and God, because if you're taking bets or the bookie odds on Jewish people, it's not looking good right now. My wife said actually just one other vignette she told me today. She said that when she meets these very hardcore Israelis, they think the whole world, they don't even know about American Jewry. In the real these cities along the border, they don't have an uncle or aunt in Teaneck or Fairlawn. They don't know American Jewry. So they really think it's Israel against the world. And that's a really scary, you look on the map, it's just everyone else is just hates you. It's a very scary thing. And I don't know if it makes them feel better that there's a bunch of us, but we love you, But I think that's part of why these missions are actually impactful, because they need those reminders that they're not alone, because I think they often do feel like they're alone. Yeah. Yeah. What do you guys think? Any thoughts? Okay, so just looking at the time, just being mindful, it's almost 9:30. I think we'll wrap up tonight's segue here by just going back to maybe Rav Hirsch. What I think Rav Hirsch is saying in a very, like he was just saying in Parshanut, is very similar to what the Rav is saying in terms of being people of fate versus people of destiny. And maybe like the Rav's Torah is basically, we've just started to start the Rav's Torah. There's still a lot more to see within Kol Dido Fake. But in the Rav's introduction, he's basically saying that our task, our mission in the world is this idea of turn fate into destiny, not the people of Goral, that we're just lambs being led to whatever happens, but being people of Yi'ud, that we have a mission, a purpose. And the Rav's big idea that we'll see next week more is like, don't ask the why question. Why did this happen? It's ask what can we do? How do we move forward? Where can we strengthen ourselves in a spiritual way, in a physical way? The Rav basically says that we can never understand the why. We'll just never understand it. So we don't ask that question. He says it's the what question. This is where that famous theory of salvation is from this idea. And perhaps I'd like to suggest that maybe the debate between Rachel and Yaakov, which was the name of Binyamin, was this very thing. Rachel has this child, and she's dying, and she knows it, and her last words are Ben Oni, like this is the son of my affliction. Like look, not Ari, set your whatever that translation aside. The simple explanation is Ben Sari. She's like, this is the son of my affliction. She's like, kind of a woe is me. And Yaakov comes along and says, no, Binyamin. Like this is gonna be a sign of strength. This is gonna be a sign of growth. This is Ben Koach, right? And perhaps like these like typologies of Goral and Yud are really embodied in this kind of debate between husband and wife. What do we call this kid? How do we approach suffering? Yaakov just lost his wife. Rachel is dying. It's sad, and maybe that part of the debate is really. I didn't see this in the Rav. The Rav never quoted this part of the Torah, but maybe latent there is the similar themes of Goral and Yud that Yaakov was trying to teach Rachel of like don't just focus. Let's not name him based on this sad moment. Let's use this as a building block for growing closer together and strengthening ourselves. So hopefully next week we'll continue this conversation, seeing more philosophical approaches to this idea. I once heard from Rishechter that like the biggest questions, like the Rav already dealt with, like we have amazing Torah on some of the biggest questions, and something we just have to dust off the dust of our shelves that we know this Torah existed, but think how relevant it is today, and try to think how we can apply this in our own lives. So hopefully we'll continue this next week. And then just for FYI, I thought for Hanukkah maybe do something like more Hanukkah related to 2 weeks. This is a little heavy dark stuff. Maybe for Hanukkah we'll do so in 2 weeks. We would take a break from this, and then we'll see if we come back to it. Okay. Oh, and also to avoid Hanukkah, so we're gonna do Wednesday night next week because it's not very Hanukkah light Hanukkah stuff. So we'll do Wednesday night next week. Okay. So I thank my parents for sponsoring Nishmat Tam, and thank you all for coming. Yasher Koach. Yes. Hold on 1 second.
Thank you, Rabbi. Oops, sorry.
Spence, I see your questions. Let's talk offline. These are good questions. I wanna think about these questions. I don't have an offhand answer for them anyway. So let's talk about these offline. Go ahead, guys. Yeah.